I let a women supporting women group turn me into a marriage villain. I cut support, asked for real help, and watched their fake sisterhood collapse. I thought it was empowerment, but it turned out to be the beginning of our marriage's end. It started innocently enough. Or at least that's what I thought when she came home excited about this new group she'd heard about at the coffee shop. She walked through the door that evening with a bright smile I hadn't seen in months. Not the kind of excitement you get from shopping or finding a good deal, but something deeper, something that made her eyes light up in a way that should have been my first warning. "There's this amazing group of women I met today," she said, practically bouncing as she set her purse down. "It's called Women Supporting Women. They meet twice a week at the community center." I looked up from my laptop where I'd been reviewing some work documents. That sounds nice. What kind of support? Business networking, personal growth, helping each other succeed. Real sisterhood, you know. She started pacing around the living room, her hands moving as she spoke. These women are entrepreneurs, professionals, mothers who are building something meaningful together. Honestly, it sounded positive. My wife had been feeling stuck lately, complaining about not having direction or purpose beyond our daily routine. If a group of successful women could help her find that spark again, I was all for it. "That's great," I said, closing the laptop to give her my full attention. "When do they meet?" "Tuesdays and Thursdays, 7 to 9. And sometimes they have weekend workshops or social events." She sat down next to me, her enthusiasm infectious. "The woman who told me about it said they've helped dozens of women start businesses, leave toxic relationships, find their authentic selves." The phrase, "leave toxic relationships," made me pause for half a second, but I pushed the thought away. This was about female friendship and professional development, nothing to do with us. "You should definitely check it out," I told her. "You've been wanting to meet like-minded women, and it sounds like exactly what you're looking for." That was my first mistake. Not recognizing it, not questioning it, but encouraging it. The first meeting was that Thursday. She came home glowing, talking about how awakening the experience had been. She'd met women from all walks of life, she said. A divorce attorney, a real estate agent, a therapist, a yoga instructor who was living her truth after leaving her corporate job. "They have this incredible energy," she explained as we got ready for bed. "No judgment, just pure support." When one woman shared her struggles, everyone rallied around her. "D&P, it's like nothing I've ever experienced." I smiled and nodded, genuinely happy she'd found something that made her feel this energized. "What kind of struggles?" "Oh, you know, career transitions, family drama, relationships that don't serve them anymore." She said that last part while looking directly at me, and something in her tone made my stomach tighten slightly. Relationships that don't serve them. Yeah, like when people in your life don't support your growth or hold you back from becoming who you're meant to be. She turned away to brush her teeth, but I caught her reflection in the mirror. The group leader talked about how sometimes the people closest to us are the ones who resist our transformation the most. I should have asked more questions right then. I should have dug deeper into what transformation meant and why she was suddenly using language that sounded like it came from a self-help seminar. But I didn't want to seem unsupportive or threatened by her new interest. "Well, I'm glad you found something that makes you happy," I said instead. The second meeting was the following Tuesday. This time she came home with a notebook full of what she called empowerment exercises and a reading list of books about feminine energy and breaking free from societal conditioning. "We did this amazing activity where we identified the voices in our lives that diminish our power," she said, flipping through her notes. "Internal voices, family voices, partner voices, societal voices." It was so eye-opening. "Partner voices?" I asked. "You know, like when someone questions your decisions or makes you doubt yourself. Even well-meaning partners can sometimes project their own fears onto us." She looked at me with this new analytical expression, like she was studying me through a microscope. I felt a chill run down my spine. "I've never tried to make you doubt yourself." "Oh, I know you don't mean to," she said quickly, but there was something patronizing in her tone that had never been there before. "It's unconscious. The group taught us about how patriarchal conditioning affects even the most loving relationships." Patriarchal conditioning. In 8 years of marriage, she'd never used that phrase once. Now, it rolled off her tongue like she'd been saying it her whole life. What exactly did they say about that? Just that women are socialized to prioritize everyone else's needs over their own. And sometimes our partners, without realizing it, reinforce those patterns. She closed the notebook and smiled at me, but it felt forced. "Don't worry, it's not personal, it's systemic." Nothing about this felt not personal. By the third meeting, she'd started using phrases that sounded like they'd been copy-pasted from whatever materials this group was sharing. The girls taught me became the beginning of every other sentence. My sisters in the group replaced my friends, and everything was about supporting women and feminine solidarity. "I think I'm going to start volunteering more of my time with the group," she announced after that Thursday meeting. "They need help organizing events and supporting new members." "That's fine, but what about our plans this weekend? We were going to finally tackle that home improvement project." "Oh, right. Actually, there's a special workshop this Saturday about financial independence for women. I really need to attend." She didn't even look up from her phone as she said it, already scrolling through what I assumed were group messages. "We've been planning this weekend for 2 weeks. I know, and I'm sorry, but this is important for my growth. You understand, right?" Finally, she looked at me with that same patronizing expression. Supporting other women has to be a priority now. That's when it hit me. I wasn't dealing with my wife finding a hobby or making friends. I was watching her get recruited into something that was systematically repositioning everyone in her life, starting with me, as obstacles to her empowerment. The weekend workshop turned into a Sunday brunch with the sisters, which became a Monday evening emergency support session for a group member going through a crisis. Our home improvement project got postponed indefinitely. "You seem to be spending more time with this group than with me," I said on Monday night. "That's because they need me right now," she replied without hesitation. "When women support women, we show up for each other. It's about being there during the hard times, not just when it's convenient." "And what about being there for your husband?" She gave me a look I'd never seen before, cold, analytical, like I'd just proved some point she'd been expecting me to make. "That's exactly the kind of thinking the group warned me about," she said quietly. The trap had been set, and I'd walked right into it. The next 2 weeks showed me just how fast someone can change when they're being systematically reprogrammed. It wasn't gradual anymore. It was like watching my wife get replaced by someone who looked exactly like her, but spoke in someone else's voice. "The girls taught me about emotional labor," she said over breakfast on a Wednesday morning. "Did you know that women do 67% more emotional labor in relationships than men?" I looked up from my coffee. Where did that statistic come from? It's well-documented research. The group shared several studies about it. She said this with complete confidence, like she'd personally reviewed academic papers instead of getting talking points from what was clearly becoming an echo chamber. What exactly counts as emotional labor? Planning, organizing, remembering important dates, managing social calendars, anticipating needs, providing emotional support. She ticked off each item on her fingers like she'd memorized a list, basically all the invisible work that keeps relationships and households functioning. But we both do those things, don't we? She gave me that new analytical stare again. "When's the last time you planned a dinner with friends? When did you last remember to buy a birthday gift for my mother? When have you anticipated what I might need without me having to ask?" The questions felt like an ambush, not because they were unfair, but because they came with this prosecutorial tone that made it clear she wasn't actually asking. She was building a case. "I do plenty around here," I said. "I handle all the finances, home maintenance, car repairs, yard work. That's different. That's task-based labor. I'm talking about emotional and mental load." She stood up and rinsed her coffee mug with more force than necessary. The group helped me realize how much invisible work I've been doing to maintain our relationship. Invisible work, mental load, emotional labor. 2 weeks ago, she would have just said she was tired or stressed. Now everything had a clinical term that positioned her as a victim, and me as an unconscious oppressor. That Thursday, she came home from the group meeting with an announcement that made my blood run cold. "I lent $300 to one of my sisters today," she said casually while sorting through the mail. "She's going through a rough divorce and needed help with a security deposit." "You lent $300 to someone you've known for 2 weeks. 3 weeks, actually. And it's not about how long I've known her. It's about supporting women when they need it most." She didn't even look at me as she said it. "When women support women, we don't ask for credit checks or collateral. We show up. That's our money from our joint account. Don't you think you should have discussed it with me first?" She finally looked up, and I saw something in her expression that chilled me, not anger or defensiveness, but disappointment. Like I was a child who'd failed to grasp a simple concept. "It's exactly what the group talked about," she said slowly. "How partners try to control women's financial autonomy under the guise of discussing decisions together. It's not about control, it's about communication. We're married. We make financial decisions together. No, you make financial decisions and I go along with them. When you bought that new tool set last month, did you discuss it with me first? That was $80. It's not about the amount, it's about the principle. She folded her arms across her chest. I'm not asking permission to support other women anymore. The word anymore hit me like a slap. When had she ever needed to ask permission for anything? When had I ever tried to control her spending or decisions? But somehow, in the span of 3 weeks, normal couple communication had been reframed as oppression. Friday night, we had plans to watch a movie and order takeout, something we'd done almost every Friday for years. At 6:30, just as I was pulling up the menu for our favorite restaurant, her phone buzzed. Emergency Sisterhood meeting, she said, already reaching for her keys. One of the women is having a crisis with her ex-husband. We need to rally around her. What about our plans? This is more important right now. She needs us. She paused at the door and looked back at me with that same patronizing expression. You understand, right? Supporting women in crisis takes precedence over movie night. She was gone before I could respond, leaving me sitting alone on our couch with takeout menus scattered on the coffee table. She didn't come home until after midnight. When I asked how the emergency went, she just said it was intense and transformative and that I wouldn't understand the depth of female solidarity. The weekend brought a new development that made the money lending look minor in comparison. I invited someone to stay with us for a few days, she announced on Saturday morning. Another sister from the group. She's between apartments and needs a safe space to transition. You invited a stranger to stay in our house. She's not a stranger. She's a sister. She's not just between apartments. She's escaping a toxic living situation. The way she said toxic made it clear this was another buzzword from the group's vocabulary. When women support women, we provide sanctuary for those who need it. For how long? However long it takes, maybe a week, maybe longer. She's getting her life together after leaving an abusive relationship. That afternoon, a woman I'd never seen before was living in our guest room. She was maybe 25, with multiple piercings, and the kind of dramatic eye makeup that suggested she'd never held a traditional job. She introduced herself with just her first name and immediately started talking about male energy and how refreshing it was to be in a female-centered space. Your wife is such an inspiration, she told me while I was making coffee Sunday morning. The way she's embracing her authentic self is beautiful to watch. Her authentic self? Yeah. Breaking free from societal conditioning and patriarchal expectations. Learning to prioritize sisterhood over relationship dynamics that don't serve her growth. She said all of this while eating cereal at my kitchen table, in my house, where she was staying indefinitely at my wife's invitation. How long have you known my wife? Time is just a construct, she replied. I've known her soul since the moment we met in Circle. They were calling their meeting Circle now. That evening I tried to have a calm conversation with my wife about boundaries and decision-making. I support you having friends and interests, I said carefully. But inviting someone to live with us without discussing it first crosses a line. What line? The line you drew? She was folding laundry with sharp, aggressive movements. I don't remember agreeing to let you set the boundaries for my friendships. This isn't about friendship. This is about someone living in our home. Our home or your home? She stopped folding and stared at me. Because it sounds like you think you get final say over who's welcome here. I think we both get a say. That's how marriage works. Maybe that's how your idea of marriage works. But I'm learning about partnerships that don't involve one person controlling the other. She picked up the laundry basket and headed toward the stairs. The group taught me that healthy relationships don't require permission slips. 3 weeks. In 3 weeks, she'd gone from my partner to someone who spoke about me like I was an obstacle to her enlightenment. The house guest stayed for 6 days. 6 days of listening to conversations about feminine energy and breaking cycles of oppression while eating dinner I'd paid for at a table where I was increasingly made to feel unwelcome. When she finally left, I thought maybe we could get back to normal. Instead, my wife announced that hosting women in transition was going to be a regular thing. It's part of my commitment to the sisterhood, she said. We're creating a network of safe spaces for women who need support. And you decided this without talking to me? I decided this because it's the right thing to do. Women supporting women isn't up for negotiation. That phrase had become her answer to everything women supporting women, like it was some kind of religious commandment that superseded every other consideration, including our marriage. I realized then that I wasn't just losing my wife to a social group. I was losing her to an ideology that had convinced her that everything about our relationship was oppression disguised as love, and that her highest calling was to prioritize strangers over the man who'd been supporting her for 8 years. The worst part was knowing this was just the beginning. By week 5, the pretense of this being about female friendship had completely evaporated. What I was living with now was open hostility wrapped in the language of empowerment. "Men just don't understand sisterhood," she said during what used to be our normal conversation about weekend plans. "You're threatened by women supporting each other because it challenges your need to be the center of attention." I'd suggested we spend Saturday together, maybe drive to the lake like we used to. The suggestion apparently revealed my deep-seated misogyny. "I'm not threatened by your friendships. I'm concerned that you cancel every plan we make." "Every plan you make," she corrected, without consulting me about whether those plans align with my priorities anymore. "Going to the lake was your idea. 2 months ago you said you missed spending time there. 2 months ago I hadn't awakened to what real supportive relationships look like." She was scrolling through her phone while talking to me, reading what I assumed were group messages. "I can't go backward just because it makes you comfortable." Awakened. Authentic self. Real supportive relationships. Her vocabulary had been completely replaced by therapy speak and activism buzzwords. It was like living with someone who'd been programmed by a combination of self-help books and political pamphlets. "What we had wasn't real support," she said, looking up from her phone with an expression of pity mixed with irritation. "What we had was me adapting myself to make you comfortable while sacrificing my own growth." "What growth have you sacrificed?" "My connection to other women, my authentic voice, my ability to prioritize female relationships." She set down her phone and faced me directly. "The group helped me realize I've been performing a version of myself designed to keep you happy. Or maybe the group convinced you that being happy in your marriage was a character flaw." The moment those words left my mouth, I knew I'd crossed some invisible line she'd drawn. Her face went cold in a way I'd never seen before. "That's exactly what they said you'd say," she replied quietly. "When women start developing independence, their partners always try to frame it as brainwashing. They, them." The group had become a they that predicted my responses and had prepared her for this conversation. I wasn't talking to my wife anymore. I was talking to a spokesperson for whatever ideology she'd absorbed. That Saturday, instead of the lake, she hosted what she called a sisterhood gathering at our house. 8 women I'd never met before filled our living room, discussing what they called decolonizing relationships and reclaiming feminine power. I tried to be polite, offering drinks and snacks, but every interaction felt loaded with judgment. These women looked at me like I was a specimen in a zoo, something to be studied and analyzed rather than a person in his own home. "Your husband seems nice," I overheard one of them tell my wife. "Does he support your journey?" "He's learning," my wife replied. Some men take longer to understand what dismantling patriarchy actually looks like in practice. Dismantling patriarchy in our living room over cheese and crackers I'd bought and arranged. After they left, I tried to address what I'd overheard. Learning what exactly? What am I supposed to be learning? How to step back and let women take up space without making it about you. She was cleaning up glasses with the mechanical efficiency of someone who'd rather be anywhere else. How to support female empowerment without feeling like it diminishes you. "I've never stopped you from taking up space. Haven't you?" She paused in her cleaning and looked at me. "When I wanted to go back to school, you talked about the expense. When I mentioned starting a business, you brought up all the risks. When I got excited about new ideas, you found practical problems. That's called being realistic. Partners help each other think through major decisions. Partners, yes. Controllers, no." She resumed cleaning with more force than necessary. "The difference is partners support dreams. Controllers find reasons why dreams won't work." Every conversation had become a trap. Normal relationship dynamics had been reframed as oppression. Practical considerations were now controlling behavior. Wanting to spend time together was making it about me. Sunday morning brought the final straw. I woke up to find 3 women sitting at my kitchen table, drinking coffee and eating the breakfast I'd planned to make for my wife and myself. "Morning," one of them said cheerfully. "Hope you don't mind. We had an early circle session and worked up an appetite." They'd used their own key. My wife had given them a key to our house. "Where's my wife?" "She's in the shower." We're planning a protest action for next weekend. The woman took a bite of toast and continued talking like this was the most normal thing in the world. We're raising awareness about domestic labor inequality. I found my wife in the bedroom getting dressed like nothing unusual was happening. You gave them a key to our house? I gave my sisters access to our shared space, she corrected. They needed somewhere private to plan an important action. Our shared space. These are strangers, and you gave them keys to where we live. They're not strangers. They're my chosen family. She said this with the tone of someone explaining something obvious to a slow child. And this house doesn't just belong to you. It belongs to us, both of us. Which means both of us should agree before giving other people keys. Both of us? Or just you? She sat down on the bed and stared at me. Because it sounds like you think you have veto power over my relationships. I think I have a say in who has access to our home. Your home, you mean? Because when you say our home but demand your approval, it's not really shared, is it? The logic was circular and designed to make me the villain no matter what I said. Express any concern and I was controlling. Set any boundary and I was oppressive. Want any input and I was threatened by female empowerment. That evening, she announced the next phase of her transformation. I'm going to be taking on more leadership responsibilities with the group, she said over dinner. They want me to help coordinate regional events and mentor new members. What does that involve? Travel, mostly weekend workshops in other cities, overnight retreats, extended training sessions. She cut her food with precise movements, not looking at me. Real sisterhood requires real commitment. How much? Travel. However much it takes. This movement is bigger than just our local group. Women across the country are waking up to these truths. Movement. It wasn't a social group anymore. It was a movement. And what about us? What about our relationship? She set down her fork and looked at me with that cold, analytical expression that had become her default. What about it? Are you asking me to choose between supporting women and being your wife? I'm asking you to consider that marriage requires some level of prioritization, and I'm telling you that I refuse to prioritize your comfort over the liberation of women. She picked up her fork and resumed eating. The group warned me you'd eventually make me choose. They said men always get threatened when women start prioritizing each other. They said you'd try to make me feel guilty for putting sisterhood first. They were right. The group. Always the group. They predicted my every response, prepared her for every conversation, given her a script for every interaction. I wasn't fighting for my marriage anymore. I was arguing with a collective that had convinced my wife that love was oppression and independence meant hostility. What if I told you I can't live like this anymore? Then I'd say you have a choice to make, she replied without hesitation. You can learn to support women supporting women, or you can find someone who's willing to perform traditional femininity for your comfort. And what if I told you that's not a real choice? Then I'd say you're finally being honest about wanting to control me. That night, she slept in the guest room not because we'd fought, but because she said she needed space to process male resistance patterns. The woman I'd married was gone. In her place was someone who spoke in buzzwords, thought in ideological frameworks, and related to me like I was an enemy to be managed rather than a partner to be loved. But I was done being managed, and I was definitely done being the villain in someone else's empowerment story. The breaking point came during what was supposed to be a simple dinner party at our house. My wife had invited a few couples from the neighborhood, something we'd done dozens of times before. What I didn't know was that she'd also invited the entire women supporting women group. I should have seen it coming when she spent the afternoon rearranging our living room into what she called a circle formation, and setting up chairs like this was going to be some kind of meeting rather than a social gathering. Just go with it, she said when I asked about the setup. Tonight is about community building. The neighbors arrived first, looking confused by the formal seating arrangement but trying to be polite. Then the sisterhood showed up like they owned the place, immediately taking over the conversation and steering everything toward their favorite topics. We're so lucky to have such a supportive sister in our group, one of them announced loudly enough for everyone to hear. Her journey toward authentic femininity has been inspiring to watch. My wife beamed like she'd just received a medal. Our neighbors looked uncomfortable, clearly not understanding what they'd walked into. What kind of group is this? Asked our neighbor from across the street. Women supporting women, my wife replied proudly. We're creating sisterhood bonds that transcend traditional relationship limitations. Traditional relationship limitations at a dinner party in front of people who'd known us as a normal married couple for years. That's when she decided to put me on display. Girls, I want you to meet my husband, she announced, gesturing toward me like I was part of a presentation. He's learning to be supportive of our sisterhood. Sometimes men need education about women supporting women. The room went quiet. Our neighbors looked mortified. The group members nodded approvingly, like this was exactly the kind of breakthrough they'd been waiting for. We've been talking about how marriage can hold women back from supporting each other, she continued, addressing the group while everyone else sat frozen. My husband is a work in progress. Work in progress. She'd just called me a work in progress at my own dinner party. That's fascinating, said the divorce attorney from the group. How has he been responding to your growth? Oh, you know how it is, resistance patterns, subtle control mechanisms, the usual male discomfort with female solidarity. My wife was speaking about me like I wasn't sitting 10 feet away, but I think he's starting to understand that supporting women means stepping back and letting us prioritize each other. Our neighbors were staring at their plates, clearly wanting to escape, but the sisterhood was just getting started. Have you tried the education approach we discussed? Asked another group member. Sometimes partners need specific guidance about how to support rather than hinder women's empowerment. We're working on it, my wife replied. It's a process training men to recognize their unconscious patterns. Training. She'd said, training. What kind of patterns? The yoga instructor chimed in, clearly performing for the group. Oh, the usual wanting to be consulted on decisions, expecting prioritization, feeling threatened by female friendships. Classic patriarchal conditioning. My wife was warming to her subject, now completely oblivious to how our neighbors were reacting. The important thing is not to enable those patterns, said the group leader. Men will test boundaries to see if women will maintain their commitments to sisterhood. They were discussing me like I was a behavioral problem to be solved at my own dinner table, using food I'd helped pay for. Our neighbor's wife caught my eye and mouthed, "I'm sorry," across the table. Even she could see how degrading this had become. The beautiful thing about sisterhood, my wife continued, is that it teaches women to stop performing for male approval and start living for authentic connection. Exactly, agreed the therapist from the group. When women prioritize each other, it forces men to confront their entitlement to female emotional labor. Entitlement to female emotional labor. These phrases were getting more clinical and more insulting by the minute. How long have you been married? One of our neighbors asked, clearly trying to redirect the conversation. 8 years, I answered before my wife could respond. 8 years of learning, she corrected. I'm not the same woman who walked down that aisle. That woman was performing femininity for approval instead of living authentically. The group murmured their agreement like she'd just shared profound wisdom. Our neighbors looked like they wanted to crawl under the table. Well, growth is important in any relationship, our neighbor's husband said diplomatically. Growth, yes, but not at the expense of female solidarity, my wife replied. I've learned that supporting other women has to come first, even when partners resist that priority. Even when partners resist. She was talking about resistance like I was some kind of obstacle to overcome rather than her husband of 8 years. That must be challenging, said our neighbor's wife, looking directly at me with genuine sympathy. It's been educational, my wife answered for me. Men aren't used to women having loyalties that supersede romantic relationships. Loyalties that supersede romantic relationships. She just announced to a room full of people that her loyalty to virtual strangers was more important than her loyalty to me. The group members exchanged knowing looks, like they'd just witnessed a teaching moment. Our neighbors looked horrified. Maybe we should move to dessert, I suggested, standing up from the table. Actually, said the group leader, this is exactly the kind of conversation that needs to happen. Men need to hear about the importance of supporting female solidarity. Absolutely, my wife agreed. Hiding these discussions just enables resistance patterns. They wanted to continue. They wanted to keep discussing my alleged shortcomings and her enlightenment in front of people who'd come over for a normal dinner party. That's when I realized this wasn't just about the group anymore. This was about public humiliation disguised as education. This was about putting me in my place in front of witnesses, and I'd sat there and taken it for 20 minutes. Our neighbors left as soon as they politely could, mumbling excuses about early mornings and babysitters. The sisterhood stayed for another hour, discussing breakthrough moments and authentic communication while I cleaned up dishes and listened to them analyze my marriage like it was a case study. When they finally left, my wife was glowing with satisfaction. That went so well, she said. I think you're finally starting to understand what supporting women actually looks like. I looked at her standing in our living room surrounded by empty wine glasses and crumpled napkins, talking about understanding and support while she'd just spent the evening treating me like a problem to be solved. "You humiliated me," I said quietly. "I shared my truth," she replied. "If that felt humiliating, maybe you should ask yourself why." And that's when I knew exactly what I had to do. The next Sisterhood gathering was scheduled for the following Thursday. This time I was ready. I'd spent 3 days thinking about that dinner party, about how she'd displayed me like a trained animal learning tricks, about how the group had nodded approvingly while she discussed training her husband to accept female solidarity. They wanted to see what supporting women looked like. I was about to give them a master class. Thursday evening came, and the familiar sound of women's voices filled our living room. I could hear them settling into their circle formation, getting comfortable for another session of analyzing male resistance patterns and celebrating authentic femininity. I waited, listened to the conversation build momentum, heard my wife sharing updates about her growth journey and how challenging it was to maintain sisterhood priorities when facing partner resistance. Perfect. I walked into the living room carrying a tray of coffee and snacks, playing the supportive husband role one last time. "Ladies," I said with a warm smile, setting down the tray, "I brought refreshments for your important work." They looked surprised but pleased. My wife beamed like I was finally getting with the program. "Thank you," said the group leader. "We appreciate supportive partners who understand the importance of what we're doing here." "Oh, I absolutely understand now," I replied, still smiling. "In fact, I've been doing a lot of thinking about supporting women since our last conversation." The group exchanged approving glances. My wife looked positively radiant. "That's wonderful," said the divorce attorney. "What insights have you gained?" "Well," I said, moving to stand where everyone could see me clearly, "I realized you're absolutely right. My wife needs much more support from women. In fact, she deserves all the support that women can provide." They nodded encouragingly, completely missing the shift in my tone. "So I've decided to help her achieve complete female solidarity," I continued. "I'm going to make sure she gets 100% of her support from women supporting women." My wife's smile faltered slightly, but the group was still nodding along. "And how are you planning to do that?" asked the therapist. "I'm removing myself as an obstacle to her authentic sisterhood experience," I announced cheerfully. "Starting tonight, she can experience what pure female support looks like without any male interference whatsoever." The room went very quiet. "What exactly does that mean?" my wife asked slowly. "It means congratulations," I said, clapping my hands together. "You're about to discover what life looks like when women supporting women is your only support system." The silence was deafening. "Ladies, you're gaining a new sister who's going to need significant support," I continued, addressing the group directly. "Financial support, housing support, emotional support. All the real, practical support that goes beyond circle meetings and empowerment talk." "What are you saying?" the group leader demanded. "I'm saying your newest member is about to experience true independence. No more male contribution to her housing, utilities, food, or any other basic needs. Pure female solidarity in action." My wife stood up from her chair, her face pale. "You can't be serious." "Oh, I'm completely serious. You wanted authentic female relationships without male interference. You got it." I looked around the circle of increasingly uncomfortable faces. Who's volunteering to provide housing for our newly liberated sister? Nobody spoke. No volunteers for housing. Okay. Who's covering her share of utilities and groceries while she transitions to this empowered lifestyle? The yoga instructor looked at her shoes. The divorce attorney checked her phone. "Strange," I said, maintaining my cheerful tone. "For a group so committed to supporting women, you all seem hesitant to provide actual support." "This is ridiculous," said the group leader. "You can't just abandon your wife because she's found empowerment." "Abandon? I'm liberating her," I corrected. "For 8 years, she's been trapped in a relationship with someone who apparently oppressed her authentic self. Now she's free to experience what pure sisterhood looks like." "You're being manipulative," accused the therapist. "I'm being supportive. Isn't this what you wanted? A woman free from patriarchal relationship structures, able to prioritize female solidarity without compromise?" My wife finally found her voice. "This isn't what we meant." "Really? Because last week you told me that supporting other women had to come first. Even when partners resist that priority, tonight you can put that philosophy into practice." I turned back to the group. "So, who's stepping up?" Who's providing the practical support that your sister is going to need? Or was all that talk about women supporting women just theoretical? The room was dead silent. 8 women who'd spent months talking about sisterhood and solidarity, and not one of them was offering real help when it actually mattered. "You're all very quiet," I observed. "Wasn't the whole point that female relationships are more authentic and supportive than traditional partnerships?" "We support each other emotionally," the yoga instructor finally said weakly. "Emotional support doesn't pay rent," I replied. "Emotional support doesn't buy groceries. Emotional support doesn't cover car payments or health insurance." "You're twisting everything," my wife said, but her voice lacked conviction. "I'm clarifying everything. For months you've positioned me as an obstacle to your authentic female relationships. Tonight I'm removing that obstacle completely." I gestured toward her gathered sisters. "Now you can discover what those relationships actually provide when you need real support instead of just validation." "This is cruel," said the group leader. "This is honest," I corrected. "Cruel would be pretending that a marriage is oppressive while benefiting from everything that marriage provides. Cruel would be treating your partner like a problem to be solved while expecting them to continue supporting your lifestyle." I looked directly at my wife. "You wanted to know what supporting women really looks like? Ask them. Ask your sisters how much support they're willing to provide when it costs them something." The group was squirming now, clearly uncomfortable with how quickly their abstract principles had become concrete realities. "You can't just throw her out," the divorce attorney said. "I'm not throwing anyone out. I'm respecting her choice to prioritize sisterhood over our partnership." I smiled at the group. "Unless, of course, you're saying that choice has consequences she didn't consider." My wife looked around the circle of women who'd spent months encouraging her to devalue our marriage. Not one of them met her eyes. "So," I said, breaking the silence, "who's taking the first shift of actual support? Because talk is cheap, but sisterhood apparently isn't." The sisterhood meeting ended in awkward silence. One by one, the women made excuses about early meetings and family obligations, leaving my wife sitting alone in our living room with the reality of what supporting women actually meant when it required sacrifice instead of just speeches. Within 48 hours, the true nature of female solidarity revealed itself. The group leader stopped responding to my wife's messages. The divorce attorney suddenly became too busy with cases to provide the emotional support she'd promised. The yoga instructor's phone went straight to voicemail. The therapist who'd spent weeks analyzing male resistance patterns discovered she had her own resistance patterns when asked for practical help. "They're just processing," my wife said on Saturday morning, still believing her sisters would rally. "This is a lot for them to handle." "What's a lot to handle?" "Supporting a woman in need. Isn't that literally what they've been preaching for months?" She didn't answer, but I could see the doubt creeping in. By Sunday, reality was setting in hard. She'd called 6 group members asking about temporary housing. 3 didn't answer. 2 said they needed to check with their partners first. 1 said her lease didn't allow overnight guests. "But what about sisterhood?" my wife asked the only member who'd taken her call. "Well, it's complicated. I mean, we support each other, but practically speaking, I can't just have someone move in." Complicated. After months of speeches about women supporting women being a sacred bond that transcended all other relationships, it became complicated the moment it required actual commitment. Monday brought the financial reality check. My wife had applied for 3 credit cards over the weekend, trying to secure the funds she'd need for an apartment deposit. All 3 applications were denied. Turns out having no individual credit history because your husband handled all the finances for 8 years doesn't demonstrate independence to banks. "This is temporary," she insisted, though she sounded less convinced each day. "Once I get established, the sisterhood will make sense again." Or maybe the sisterhood never made sense because it was built on complaining rather than commitment. Tuesday evening, she attended what turned out to be her final group meeting. She came home looking defeated, though she tried to hide it. "How was Circle?" I asked. "Different," she said quietly. "Smaller." "How small?" 4 people showed up, including me. The movement was dissolving as quickly as it had formed, now that it demanded actual sacrifice from its members, instead of just emotional validation. Wednesday brought the final blow. The woman who'd started the group, the leader who'd convinced my wife that marriage was oppression and sisterhood was liberation, announced she was moving across the country to focus on personal growth. "She's abandoning everyone," I said when my wife told me. "She says she's following her authentic path," my wife replied, but her voice was flat. She needs space to process her own journey. And what about the women who followed her journey? What about supporting them? She said we're all strong enough to continue supporting each other without formal structure. Translation: good luck, you're on your own. By Thursday, my wife was sitting at our kitchen table with rental listings spread in front of her, calculator in hand, trying to figure out how someone with no individual income and no credit history could afford a one-bedroom apartment. The cheapest place I can find is $800 a month, she said without looking up, plus deposit, plus utilities, plus groceries, plus gas, plus insurance. How much do you have saved? $300. From my personal account, $300. After 8 years of marriage, after months of lectures about financial independence and supporting women, she had $300. What happened to the Sisterhood fund you mentioned? The group savings account for women in transition? She looked up at me for the first time in days. There was no fund. It was just something we talked about creating, just something they talked about like everything else. Friday afternoon, she got a text from the last remaining group member. The woman had decided to move back home with her parents and take a break from activism. That evening, my wife sat across from me at the dinner table where she'd humiliated me just 2 weeks earlier. I made mistakes, she said quietly. What kind of mistakes? I thought supporting women meant not supporting you. I thought independence meant hostility. I thought sisterhood meant abandoning partnership. What changed your mind? Discovering the difference between emotional support and actual support. She looked down at her hands. When I needed real help, real commitment, real sacrifice from people, the sisterhood disappeared. And what does that tell you? That maybe relationships that require you to reject other relationships aren't really supportive. They're just exclusive. That night, she asked if she could stay. I can't go back to how things were, I told her honestly. I can't pretend the last 2 months didn't happen. I don't want to go back either. I want to go forward, but differently. Without the group, without the ideology, without treating you like an enemy. What about supporting women? I learned the difference between supporting women and being manipulated by women who use feminism to justify selfishness. She met my eyes directly. Real support doesn't require abandoning everyone else who cares about you. And what about authentic femininity? Maybe authentic femininity includes being a good partner to someone who's been supporting you for 8 years instead of treating that support like oppression. 2 weeks later, she got a text from the group leader, who was apparently struggling with her cross-country move and needed a place to stay. Sister, I'm going through a transition and need support. Can I stay with you for a few weeks while I get back on my feet? What are you going to tell her? I asked. My wife deleted the message and looked at me. I'm going to tell her what she taught me. I'm going to prioritize the relationship that actually supports me. The woman who'd spent months teaching my wife that marriage was oppression learned the hard way that sisterhood, without substance, is just shared complaining. And my wife learned that real support comes from people who love you enough to be honest, not people who flatter you enough to be useful.